Baltimore and double. It's crazy and all that stuff, and it is the dead of summer, and we usually are only talking baseball and waiting for football here. But in this very unusual offseason for the Washington Capitals, I have found it necessary to catch up with Ed Frankovic every week or two here in the offseason because it's been a little bit of a merry-go-round, hasn't it, Ed?
Yeah, it has, absolutely. We got guys signing big money contracts and a trade here. We had to ship Marcus Johansson out. So Brian McClellan's been very busy. But I think we're finally at the point now where we know who the main players are going to be on this roster heading into training camp, and there's going to be some competition for the first time in 3 years.
Well, let's go through the changes in the last 2 weeks. Johansson, some thoughts.
Let's start with first, I think it was the day before free agency started, June 30th, Dmitry Orlov signs a 6-year, $5.1 million each year, so a $30.5 million contract given to Dmitry Orlov, a guy who just last summer the team was only wanted to commit to for 1 year. And I think Orlov wanted that too, and he was getting projected to be in the top four. And Brian McClellan made the statement, if he plays well and does well, then I'll pay him. Well, guess what? Brian McClellan paid him, and had to, because Dmitry Orlov certainly became an amazing defenseman paired with Matt Niskanen. He's going to be back. We had a conference call with Brian McClellan just shortly after free agency started on the 3rd of July, and Brian confirmed that they didn't want to lose that top D pair of Matt Niskanen and Dmitry Orlov, and you're going to see a lot of that in this upcoming season. So that was the first big move that happened.
All kind of pieced together, right, to some degree. I mean, McClellan really had to have some vision for all of this stuff, even though it's sort of trickling out, right, like reading the tea leaves as to how he wanted to put this roster together, because I think some of this stuff has been a little surprising. Has been, well, I didn't think of that, I didn't think Johansson would just be thrown out for draft picks. I didn't see that coming, but I guess the salary cap sort of dictates that these things are going to happen, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ness, and you've been around sports a long time. I've been around sports a long time. Despite what a lot of people in the media will write and say that this was reactionary and unplanned, this really was planned. And I did a big piece out at WNST.net. I hope everybody goes out and read it. I know a lot of people have already. But this really was planned. Because the next big domino that fell was the biggest domino. You and I talked about this since the season ended. Evgeny Kuznetsov was going to get paid. He was going to get a deal. The question was, how much was it going to be? And it was a unique situation with Kuznetsov because he's Russian, and he has the KHL coming after him. The KHL likes to try and protect their stars, and they had an opportunity to try and bring him back. So it was a different restricted free agent situation for Brian McClellan. He had teams in Russia wanting to bring him back, and he could play in the Olympics. And if Kuznetsov stays over there for 2 years, now he's an unrestricted free agent. The Capitals lose the rights to him. So he had a little bit of leverage, some good leverage on McClellan and the Caps. And let's be honest, when you look at their system, when you look where the holes are in Hershey and in the juniors where all their draft picks are, they're thin at center. I mean, the strategy they took going into the expansion draft was clearly they were going to protect their centers. They were going to protect Backstrom, Kuznetsov, and Lars Eller. That's why they didn't go to an 8-skater and one goalie type of situation. They were willing to give up a Nate Schmidt or Grubauer, whoever was going to be, and end up being Schmidt, because they didn't want to lose Eller. They don't have many centers in the organization, but what they do have is they do have an abundance of left wing. So Kuznetsov got paid $7.8 million. I'll be honest with you, it was higher than I thought. But when you look at it, Ness, when I look at some comparables around the league, Johnny Gaudreau signed a contract for $6.7 million, I believe it was last year or the year before. And they're very similar players.
Well, you're also paying him to be better than he's been, and the trend would be, other than the hiccup 2 seasons ago, he has gotten better. And the feeling is he'll be better in 2018 and 19 than he is today. You do bet on that in hockey with these young players that get better. You're not really betting on the now, you're betting on the future.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And with Kuznetsov, we did see him get better because after they lost to the Penguins in 2016, he was one of the guys you could point to and say, hey, this guy didn't play well. Andrei Burakovsky didn't play well. The Caps didn't get anything out of their bottom 6. Now, you can argue they didn't get much out of their bottom 6 against the Penguins this season. But Kuznetsov is a guy you can't say didn't bring his game because he played well against the Penguins. He was one of the few guys, him and a couple others. He was on his game, and he showed that he can take his game to the next level in the playoffs. I think he had 5 goals in the postseason and a bunch of assists. So he is getting paid on getting even better. There's no doubt about it. And again, I go back to if they let this guy walk, if they let this guy go to Russia, they're done, Ness. They don't have. How many years did we talk about the Capitals need a second-line center, and now they finally have them. They've developed them. I mean, every time you and I meet with Coach Trotz, whether it was at up there Buffalo Wild Wings or Greenmount Station, he glows when he talks about 2 guys, Backstrom and Kuznetsov, about how good they are and how good they can be, especially Kuznetsov. So they had to sign this guy, and so they paid $7.8 million. Would they have liked it to run around $6.7, the Gaudreau contract? Yes. But let's be honest, the Kuznetsov and Orlov contract at $5.1 million, I thought he was going to get anywhere from bottom end 4, or at least 4.5. Those 2 contracts were not the reason Marcus Johansson got traded. Everyone was saying, the trade for Johansson comes right after they signed Kuznetsov. Well, they knew the minute they signed Oshie, they were probably moving Johansson because he's the only number that fit. He had $4.5 million on the cap. They have Jacob Vrana, they have Burakovsky and Jacob Vrana ready to step into at least Burakovsky's top 6. We saw that in the playoffs, and Vrana's a guy they think that can definitely do it. And would they like to have Johansson? Absolutely. He's a good player. But there's only so much money.
Well, they would love to have Joe Ward back, and they'd love to have Justin Williams, and they'd love to have, you can't keep everybody. And, in this offseason, it really started with Trotz, right? I mean, in the days after they lost, the question was, well, are they going to extend Trotz, or are they going to let him lame duck out? And then the next thing was, well, what can we trade Ovechkin? And, that was the story for a week or two, right? Before the Stanley Cup Finals even began, they were shoveling dirt on his grave, and maybe it's time that he gets moved. And none of that stuff really felt realistic, and then you got into the heart of it. I'm kind of shocked that Oshie stayed, right? I'm kind of shocked that he didn't get a lot of money elsewhere and and go test and all that stuff. I thought he would have been the guy that wouldn't have come back, and I really thought they were going to lose Grubauer, not Schmidt, to Vegas. So if you would have had tea leaves on this, and you and I, in the darkest moments after losing Game 7 to Pittsburgh, if we would have said, well, where will they be at the baseball All-Star break? Who will be on the team and who won't be on the team? I feel pretty good about where they are in the middle of summer. I hate losing players and key players and guys they've had, but I certainly don't look at this team and say they're going to scuffle next year. The only question to me is whether they're going to be a 1, a 2, or a 3 seed. And as we've seen, being a 1 seed doesn't matter all that much. But they're a playoff team. They're a very, very good team, and there's no reason that they can't make this interesting next spring.
I have them project. They had, 118 points this past season, the year before 120. They had the best team in the league on paper. They had all the pressure on them. You and I talked about that a lot. It's pressure, pressure, pressure. They didn't deliver. They couldn't beat Pittsburgh. I mean, that's the bottom line. Pittsburgh could handle the pressure better than the Capitals did. I mean, you and I sat next to each other for Game 7. We saw the panic after it was 1-0. But I agree with you. When you look at where this team is, as I wrote at WNST.net, I think they're a 100 to 105 point team as they are right now, even bringing these young guys up. They are really solid up the middle of the ice. I mean, when you look
they'll have more points next year than the Nashville Predators will, even though the Predators played well here, right?
Right, exactly. The Predators snuck in as that 8th seed, and they put it together at the right time. They had a really strong defense, and their goaltender got hot. I mean, let's be honest, goaltending is such a huge factor. I mean, the main reason the Capitals didn't beat the Penguins was Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, right behind him was Sidney Crosby, because anytime there was a key moment in the series and the Penguins needed a goal, he seemed to get it or set it up. But Marc-Andre Fleury was the biggest reason, goaltending. Braden Holtby probably had his worst playoffs. I mean, let's be honest. Holtby, I love Holtby, but that was his worst playoff.
Well, I mean, the hook against the Maple Leafs wasn't a good look, right?
Right. I mean, you and I, we'd go back and forth whether we thought that was a good move or not, and there's people I talked to around the team that said he had to pull him. He had to send a message. Hey, the way you're playing is not good enough. And they gave away that third period. They probably wouldn't have come back anyways. But after that, Holtby was pretty good the rest of the series. I mean, there's only one goal I think I'd want him to have back, and that was the Schultz goal in Game 4. But they lost the last 5 games because they couldn't score. But The team is good. You look at the Oshie decision really was, hey, we don't have any other right wings in the system. And people were saying, well, they could try and they could get Williams cheap. And it was pretty clear. Look at what Williams got. Williams got $4.5 million a year from Carolina, and he's 35 years old. He's 5 years older than Oshie. He's definitely slowing down. He's nowhere near as fast as Oshie. And I like Justin Williams. You know that. We talked about him a lot. But Justin Williams was not an option to keep as the top line right wing. And they got Oshie for $5.75 million average. Now, they had to go 8 years for that, and you and I talked about that last time. But Oshie could have got $7 million a year from somebody for 5 years. There's no doubt my $5 million deal for 5 years. But he liked it here so much, he took the discount. And he traded money at length at WNST.net when that deal went down. But I think the Oshie deal was done because they didn't feel comfortable with the right wings they had, and they loved the guy. He's a perfect fit here. He's a hardworking. He's a player on the team that nobody else can play like. And then when you look at the other moves, so they lost in the end. They lost Nate Schmidt and they lost Marcus Johansson because we knew they were losing Alsner. We knew Shattenkirk was a rental. So the real losses that everybody seems to be belly aching about, Ness, is the Schmidt and Johansson, and you're going to lose one of them in the expansion draft. One of those guys was definitely going, and McVie made a run on defenseman. Now, that's hurting him now because some of the trades George has been forced to make with all those defensemen have been terrible. He's getting second-round draft picks in 2020. So I referenced that in my blog at WNST.net as an example of, hey, the return McClellan got on Marcus Johansson, a second round and a third round next year, was a heck of a lot better than a top 4D trade that McVie was forced to make with Dallas. So, I got to give McClellan credit for what he's done. He knew he was going to lose players. He managed to stay under the cap, and he still kept a very good core of this team intact.
He is Ed Frankovic. He is our longtime Caps blogger and historian at WNST.net, and you can follow his journey all summer long. I mean, we're kind of getting into a little bit of a quiet time here, right? I mean, as much as football gets going in a couple of weeks, hockey tends to get going right around Labor Day weekend. We're not real far out on that. The stretch from that period of time when the Penguins hold up the cup and all the hell breaks loose with the expansion draft to now, it's going to quiet down now, right? I mean, most of the pieces are in place here for the Caps, and I feel like they sort of survived this summer when this bust-up could have been a lot more monumental, to steal Ted Leonsis' company name, than it's been.
Yeah, he's going to like that reference there, buddy.
I think he is.
But yeah, I really feel like they managed to keep a team. I still think they're Stanley Cup contenders, especially if they can get some of these young guys on defense to develop. And that's another reason. So people said, well, why didn't they do more to try and protect Nate Schmidt? Okay, why didn't they offer a deal to Vegas to keep Nate Schmidt? Well, some people said, well, they should give up next year's first-round pick. Well, you work a deal, you give them, basically you'd be giving your first-round pick next year and Grubauer, because he would pick Grubauer if he's not taking Schmidt. You're going to give up a first-round pick and Grubauer for a guy, Nate Schmidt. Now, I like Nate Schmidt a lot, Ness, you know that, but he has never played a full 82 games and a full playoffs as a top four defenseman. He played great in the playoffs. There's no doubt about it. But, I still go back to how much of that ability for him to play at that level was he didn't play a whole lot once they got Shattenkirk. So he was very well rested. And you know how long the hockey season is where you have, then you go in the playoffs and it's just, it's just, and there's a lot of hitting. It's a totally different game, and he managed to not have to play down the stretch. He didn't play, I think, the first 3 or 4 games in the Toronto series, so he was very fresh. So he looked great.
But if you're losing a guy that you didn't play in the playoffs anyway, I don't know that you could sit around and boo-hoo about it, Ed.
Yeah, and there's people doing that, but to want to give up a first-round pick next year and your backup goalie, who you're absolutely going to need because you got 13 cents of back-to-backs coming up this season. They don't have another goalie in the system ready. Phoenix Copley, they signed him to a 2-way contract for this season, and he's on a 1-way next year. They're hoping that he's going to be the guy next year because Grubauer's on a 1 year for $1.5 million, which is a great deal. We all know how well Philip Grubauer can play, and they're going. let's go back to 2000, with Trotz's first year, 2014-15. You remember they were running Justin Peters out there so many times. I mean, you and I talked about it. They don't have much of a chance.
It was a giveaway. Yeah, it was a giveaway night where you had to score 5 goals to win. It was like Orioles pitching.
That's what it would have been with Copley. That's what it would have been. The guy's played 2 games at the NHL level. He has a save percentage of 83%. Whereas, and people are saying, this guy's ready. This guy's ready. We can trade Grubauer. We can let him go. No. You look at Philip Trotz's first year. He had 20 games in at the NHL. Games with 92%. He was proven. He was ready to be the backup at that point. Phoenix Copley is not ready. They had to bring Grubauer back in the fold, and they're going to need him with the younger defense, and McClellan talked about that. They're going to need Brooks Orpik back. That's why they didn't buy him out, because guess what? You buy Brooks Orpik out, you got a cap hit now for 4 years, money you're going to need for John Carlson and Lars Eller and some of these other guys that are going to be free agent next year and the year after. It just didn't make sense to buy Orpik out. He's means a lot in that locker room. And he played, and Brooks Orpik, well, as a third defenseman. He's not worth $5.5 million anymore, but had you buy him out, you only saved 3. So then you got to go get another defenseman. It just made no sense to buy Brooks Orpik out. Once they did that, you know, it was pretty obvious that Marcus Johansson was probably going to be the guy traded because of the money hit he has, and they have a bunch of young defensemen. They've got Madison Bowie from down in Hershey, possibly is going to be in the mix. Your buddy Aaron Ness is very much mentioned in the press conference.
That's nasty Ness to you, by the way, just so you know.
I mean, we liked him a few years ago when he was up. He can skate. I mean, they have Christian Hughes down there could come up. Tyler Lewington. They drafted Lucas Johansson as the #1 pick last season. They've got young defensemen. That's why they were willing to give up Nate Schmidt and not try and give up more assets, because they're going to need that #1 pick next year. They got to start looking at a center, because Nicholas Backstrom, 5 or 6 years, you need a third line. They're going to need to use that pick on a center or maybe a right wing is what they're going to need that pick for. So I really think they made a right move not getting rid of
Ed, I'm going to let you roll, man. It's always good to check in with you. We're having a little phone difficulty with Ed Frankovic. He is, of course, our author and historian of all things Capitals. And you can follow his blog out at WNST.net, as well as at Ed Frankovic out on Twitter. We'll check back with him later on in the summer, get us ready for a hockey season. Let me take a little break here. The Caps have been doing a lot of stuff over the last couple of weeks. And, of course, we have been presenting the Peter Principles in its entirety out at WNST.net, as well as in our Buy a Toyota audio vault. You can check out all 8 chapters now online, as well as chapters 1 through 5 in the Buy a Toyota audio vault. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I am a very available individual. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and anywhere the internet is served. Luke and I will be in Miami all week for All-Star Game, pre, post, and wrap up, and probably knocking back some Cuban food before it's all over with as well. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.